Champions Real Estate Team here at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Ambassador Real Estate Company. My name is Mark Wehner, the second team leader here. Joining me today is Russ Williams, Williams Mortgage. So we jump on every Wednesday, run down what's going on in the real estate market for the last 7 days, give you a quick tip on real life things happening here in the real estate world as being a property owner and real estate investing. So I was at my property, was it Friday of last week, I believe it was, and getting a new refrigerator over there, a nice new Christmas present for the residents that live there. So they've been awesome and all that good stuff. So as I'm over there, I look out when you're anytime you're at your properties and things like that, you just want to keep an eye out anything that's preventative maintenance and stuff. Well, sure enough, they had not disconnected the hose from the hose bib, the hose faucet thing outside. So nice huge chunk of ice around it, and luckily nothing had burst yet or anything like that. So got a nice. Went to the old hardware store. I thought I had a heat gun here at the house, but I had to go buy a heat gun. So, but get those last of the year expenses on there on that expense report that you can write off. So you can get a nice new heat gun. But anyway, so that's just one of those things. Obviously, we're kind of in the dead of winter, and Russ and I, before we jumped on here talking about weather, obviously going to be below zero this weekend. So just if you have a hose bib or you haven't thought about it, obviously now's the time. It might be a little too late. You might have to go buy a heat gun, but if you need one, give me a holler, shoot me a text. I can got one you can borrow on hand here. So, but those are those things, just those preventive maintenance. That's kind of our quick tip. Obviously, the weather's gotten cold the last couple weeks here, and so just if you haven't done those things, obviously last night you kind of just maybe got some new yard decorations in your yard, so those type of things. Just be mindful of getting those patio furniture in if you have room for it in your garage or things like that. Some of them, obviously, if you keep those things inside, maybe those last a little bit longer. All that good stuff. And if you need more storage, give us a holler. We can help you find a new house with a little more storage and all that good stuff. But we'll play there. But anyways, we like to keep you run down what's going on in the real estate market over the last 7 days. So let's jump into that here. Obviously, we're heading into the dead of winter. So our numbers obviously picked up a little bit from last week, after the holiday weekend and things like that, Thanksgiving and such. So we're back up to 523 new listings and 287 new contracts that were written. So we're about 2 to 1, almost there, ratio. So two houses coming on the market, one going off. So we're seeing a decent supply, which is nice. Obviously cold weather. So those sellers out there, if you're looking to sell your house, obviously make sure the biggest thing is pricing it right. And then sold homes 456 there for those happy new homeowners there. So let's look at the overall 30,000 foot view market here. So our overall numbers of our inventories dropped a little bit. So even though we saw more houses come on the market and less houses go off the market with those pending units, we're still seeing some of that. That was at 4,100, 4,125, 4,126, I think last week. So it dropped down a little bit. And so some of those sellers may be taking their house off the market to put it back on in the spring. So one methodology that you may have, at least here we use a Champions Real Estate Team. Love to have the opportunity to work with you, but you may see as agents, we can get back on the MLS and see what's canceled or maybe what's expired. Just because it's canceled and expired doesn't necessarily mean it's off the market. Those sellers, if there's underlying circumstances, may still want to sell their house. And so sometimes, reaching back out to those sellers and saying, hey, maybe you just get in the market and you're just thinking about it, but we can go back and, with your search criteria, take a look at what's on the market out there that maybe just got off the market in the last month and say, hey, you still interested in selling? Oh yeah, we love to sell a house if we can get X. Well, is X the right price for that house? And as a buyer's agent, we can look at those numbers. And if it's a fair price and it works for everybody, ultimately, working as your agent as a buyer, we want to get you the best price, but ultimately, you want to work together with that seller and all that good stuff. So you might be able to find an off-market house that was on the market and be able to, maybe right size that price for you if that seller's motivated to get on it. Because the thing is, if they pull that house off the market today at 525, they may try to list it in the spring for 535. And then we go back and look when that house is listed. Hey, it was just listed, here. They would take that for that price. Oh, what's the difference between 3 months? The weather gets nicer. They're getting more buyers in the buyer's pool. May create a little bit more competition for you. But those are the things that working with an agent, Champions Real Estate Team, we're not just going to show you what's on the market today on the MLS. We can look back and find those, sift through, what was on the market. Maybe it's still on the market, in the seller's eyes, but doesn't have a sign in the yard, and we can reach out to them. So there's different ways to maneuver in this market to find off-market deals, as some people call them. But that's just one of those things you got to look at. And, from a seller's perspective, keeping that house on the market, you may not necessarily have to do a price reduction because your buyer just may not be in the market yet or on the market yet. Because we can look when we're listing a house and say, hey, if they're using a showing service, we can see the number of showings that that house has had. And maybe in this time of the market and in a price point, they may be only 5 to 10 showings in the last 30 days. That's not that much. But those 5 to 10 buyers out there, that's just not the right house for them. Doesn't mean it's the wrong price. It's just not the right house for them. And you don't need to necessarily chase the market down. Now if you can look at it and you are overpriced, then you need to right size or position that house where it needs to be in the marketplace, in regards to all that. So I mean, that's just kind of I know that was probably hit you with the fire hose there on all the different things, but those are things that we talk to you about, when we do a buyer coaching session or even a coaching selling session. Like, should we list it now? Should we list it later? What's the benefits of now? Well, you got less competition of all the sellers out there, and if your house is primed and ready to go and rocked, and we got the stagers in there, we got, awesome pictures for you, and we position that house price wise to sell, it can be a benefit for both you, to get out there before, the masses get out there, and that side of it. So give us a holler, and we can go over all that. So let's jump in here with Russ Williams, Williams Mortgage. I know the Fed's doing a little movement on it. So he's the person that keeps finger on the pulse, and he keeps us up to date on what's going on. Obviously we talked the Fed lowering that interest rate doesn't necessarily correlate directly with the buckets, the mortgage rates, but it does have that affects the bond rate, which can affect obviously your mortgage rate because they have that gap. They usually want to be 1.5 to 2 points above what the bond market is at, that 10-year. So anyways, I'll let him give more of the example and the explanations of it. So, but you're muted here, Russ.
You'd think I'd figure this thing out. Yes, that's true. Every 6 weeks, the Federal Reserve Bank meets in their open market committee meetings. And it just so happens that yesterday and today was their meeting. At 1 o'clock today, they made their policy decision to drop the short-term rate by 0.25%. As Mark mentioned, we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, actually, that the markets anticipate what they think the Fed will do. 3 weeks ago, there was roughly a 30 to 40% chance the Fed was going to drop by a quarter. That went to 90% as much as recently as last week. And the mortgage rates actually have moved down already in advance of this meeting today. With the Fed dropping 0.25%, a couple of things that are noteworthy there. They're going to start buying $40 billion in treasuries starting this Friday. That will be very favorable for mortgage rates. So we'll have to watch and see how that's going to play out. More importantly, though, in the Fed press conference that happens after the Fed meeting, Chairman Powell pointed out a couple of things that were interesting. The Federal Reserve Bank has a dual mandate from the government, which means they are responsible for keeping price stability, which means keeping inflation in check, and they haven't been terribly successful with that over the years. Secondly, to keep full employment, which doesn't mean zero unemployment. It means at a healthy rate, which is generally somewhere in the low fours. And so we're right there with both those. But Powell did note, the chairman did note that job gains have been overstated in recent months. That is an indicator that the Fed is noticing that the job market is weakened. He also said there's growing evidence that inflation is coming down. We've talked about that for some time on here, that we have been seeing that happen. And so both those things, jobs weakening and inflation coming down, are favorable to the Fed being a little bit more lenient with their short-term rates. Powell did say they feel that rates right now, after having the 0.25-point drop in short-term rates today for things like student loans, credit cards, auto loans, that rates are now in a high range of neutral, which means they're not ruling out that they might not drop when they next meet in January, but they want to wait and see what that economic data is that comes out between now and then. We've talked about, Mark, many times over the last few months, with the federal government being shut down, a lot of those economic reports have not been released. So there's going to be a whole slew of economic data coming out in the next 2 to 3 weeks that will give the Fed a better look at, do we see a weakening job market? Do we see inflation showing signs of continuing to move downwards? And if those things do happen, if we see unemployment increasing with jobs weakening, and if we see inflation continuing to come down, there's a reasonable chance that we'll see the Fed drop rates again at the next meeting, but they won't commit to it. In fact, one of the things that they do every other meeting is they have the summary of economic projections, also called the dot plot, which is where Each of the members, the voting members, will indicate what they think should happen at future meetings. And most of them think that we should stay in the general range of where we're at. A couple want to be more aggressive, and there's two of them that don't want to move at all. So we'll have a lot more clarity in 6 weeks. But having said that, with all the economic data being dumped in the next few weeks, there's going to be a lot of volatility. So from day to day, rates may move up, they may move down. But the trend is going to likely be that we have a lot of fluctuations until we come out the other side, probably of Christmas. So having said that, in the event that you do want to go out and purchase a home and finance it, uh, you're buying the house, you're marrying the house, but you're dating the rate. If rates happen to come down next year, which we hope that they do, you have bought the house at today's price, as opposed to possibly an inflated price if interest rates do drop next year. What do I mean by that? Many finance buyers are looking at payment rather than price. So if rates come down, that means that your borrowed dollar is going to buy you more house. So you may be able to stretch and buy a little bit more house, and that could start to put upward pressure on home prices again. So we're going to watch this closely, but get together with Mark and his team, put a plan together, and if now is the right time to buy a house or to move up or even downsize, have a plan in place before we hit the new year.
Yeah, I know you mentioned something in there about when they're buying the U.S. Treasuries. Is that something that kind of correlates with like when people talk about quantitative easing, when they're trying to inject
Yep.
that money and buying those bonds, or is that?
Yep, it's basically quantitative easing. That's what it is. Or they're basically reinvesting the balance sheet as it runs off, meaning as those bonds are maturing, they're reinvesting that money. That's a good thing because if the Fed is reinvesting to the tune of $40 billion beginning on Friday, that means that other bond investors are going to have potentially fewer options, which means if they want to buy that bond, they may have to pay more to get it, which means the yield on that bond may come down, and that could be favorable for mortgage rates.
Yeah, that's one thing I've just been I've heard that you hear that phrase thrown around, in the mortgage industry and obviously in the financial industry and how it affects the economy and things I've heard is, obviously if they have those levers that they can pull to help the economy move along. And if they're going to, and that's basically what they did during the COVID time period is they did that quantitative, they inject a lot of stimulus, however you want to do it. They're printing money. And that basically, and so like you said, those interest rates get favorable. Yes, that's great for the buyer, but that's also, can drive those prices up. So it's kind of like you said, you got to pull those levers. One lever is going to do one thing, but the other lever is going to be doing the opposite. And so you have to, it's a balancing act, and I think, if there's more money injected in that being, positioning yourself to buy assets is going to be helpful because that's not necessarily helping your dollar, the strength of the dollar in that regard. So I think those are all things that like we talk about. I mean, not to get too deep down in the woods, but that's stuff that, when we talk about these things, it's our goal, between Russ and I and our teams is to give you that information to say, hey, is now the time to buy a house, and get the money out of, the savings account and put it towards an asset that, can hopefully affect some of that appreciation, and even if you're thinking of doing, investing, is buying, a real estate, opportunity out there. Cause I've seen right now there's a decent amount of investment properties that I'm seeing come on the market because it's the end of the year and some of these investors just want to get out and they're realizing tax implications, whether they got to get it on the books, get it off the books, and those type of things. I think that's all stuff that, is now the right time, and obviously with mortgage rates and, and if they are buying more of those treasury bonds and stuff, that could be, indicative of what, what the future may hold, moving forward. And if you can get ahead of that curve, it can obviously help you, with regards to that stuff. So I don't know, Russ, you're on mute again, but,
Yep, lost my connection.
if
Sorry
there's
about
anything you
that.
want to jump in, I know we can go a whole hour long on quantitative easing, but I think
Yeah.
in my mind, just them starting to use that lever a little bit, when are they going to, obviously we don't have the crystal ball, but if they're starting to do that, I can, potentially see, like you said, the volatility in the mortgage rates, and they're doing it now potentially because there's not a lot of buyers in the market and they feel like, oh, we can do this and it's not going to hopefully skyrocket prices, because the flood of the buyers aren't going to come into the market, typically this time of year in that December, January timeframe. And then maybe it's not going to hit such a big, I don't know what I'm trying to say, is a big pop out there where buyers are like, oh my gosh, the rates are down. Because I think if we get down 5.5, and I don't, we don't have a crystal ball, but you get down to the fives, I think that's gonna start movement, in that buyer sector. And I think that just having that a 5 in front of that number, people are going to think it's a little bit better. Well, that's 5.8, whether that's 5.5, or that's, it's just a different psychological impact. I feel, some of those buyers
Yeah,
are out there. So
definitely. The National Association of Realtors says that if we do get a 5 handle on those rates, even at 5.99, that they are forecasting
yeah,
that could pull as many as 5 million people off the sidelines, meaning additional buyers, and that's going to put more pressure on prices.
yeah, yeah. And I think if you're, in my opinion, I guess take it for what, but the right time to buy is when you are ready. So, I mean, Russ and I can sit here and yap and talk about all this stuff, but until we have a sit down coaching session with you, get a playbook and really hone in what are your goals, and it is, and that's what we do. I have clients right now, great clients, and we've shifted gears a couple times, and that's great. And they're like, oh my gosh, we feel like we're wasting your time. I'm like, no, you don't know what you don't know. And all that we can do as agents, or all I can do myself, is provide that information. You say, well, wait a minute, we need to put the brakes on, we need to change gears, we need to go this way, we need to go that way. And then at the end, hopefully you've made the right decisions for what's best for you. And is now the right time to buy? Is now the right time to build? Is now the right time to invest? I don't know. That's for you to determine based off of hopefully the information that we can provide to you in a whole matter of pictures. Because these clients literally, they were going to invest in real estate, then they decided to potentially buy a primary house and then potentially build a house. And so there's all the different avenues, which is great, and they're learning about all of it. And then, like you said, and then it's like just like the feds, which lever are you going to pull at what point? Do you want to pull the investing lever now, or do you want to pull the I want to buy buy your primary house? So there's, anyways, I go down a whole rabbit hole, but I get excited about this stuff. I love helping people in that regards, and I can talk about it for a long time. So, but I know I got things we got to get to tonight, so I got family stuff. But anyways, awesome. But if you want to carry on this conversation, like, subscribe, text me down here. Love to get a conversation going with you, any of those buyers, sellers out there, and just get your real estate journey started. And that's the biggest thing. Figure out what makes sense for you, and let's rock and roll with it. So I know this is a long-winded video. Appreciate you guys sticking around. But yeah, we'll see everybody next week. Unless Russ, you got anything
Nope. Have a great week. Stay warm. It's going
throw
to
in
get
there at
cold
the
this
end?
weekend. Make sure you unhook those hoses.
All right, Rock.